The following program is a UWTV classic.
From the University of Washington in Seattle, Upon Reflection.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of Upon Reflection at the 1996 Northwest Book Fest. I'm Marcia Alvar. The writing of John Edgar Wideman spans 3 decades and includes novels, criticism, short stories, and autobiography. His career has been described as a constant search for new modes of expression as he challenges both conventional perceptions about Black life and the methods for telling about it. His newest book is The Cattle Killing, his first new novel in 6 years. Welcome to Upon Reflection.
Thank you.
If indeed the career of the writer and your career is this constant search for new ways of expressing yourself, what's the new territory that you entered and explored in writing this new novel?
Well, the new territory is the old territory revisited, and hopefully revisited with a change. I wrote about Philadelphia and the plague in Philadelphia in 1793, or rather I tried to write about it as early as 1968. I know the date because I was putting together an anthology of African American literature in the stacks of various libraries, and I found Richard Allen's narrative of the plague year. Richard Allen, who was the founder of the African Methodist Church in Philadelphia. And I tried to write a story about that plague year, and I just couldn't do it. I did it, but it wasn't a very good story. About 20 years later, I wrote Fever, which was a pretty good story, I think. And published it along with 9 other stories in a book. But I haven't been able to let the material go, so I've returned to it in The Cattle Killing.
If the first one wasn't very good, the second one was better. Are you happy with this?
Well, this is longer. It's longer anyway. It's a novel. I'm happy about lots of things. I'm happy that I found a form that allowed me to play with history and try out some ideas about history and try out some techniques of writing that, for me, have been developing over the years. I felt that it gave me room to be a musician, room to create the kinds of effects that I love to hear in jazz, improvisation and spontaneity.
If people have an idea of history as a linear progression of events, they will be surprised by your definition of history because, as you say in the book, it's forward to go backward, backward to go forward. There's a constant slipping of time in the way you view history.
Well, it's not original with me. In the rituals and the mythology and religions of most traditional people, there is a sense of time not as linear, not as progressive, but as a great sea or ocean. And that great sea or ocean contains all the people who've ever lived on the earth, all events. And in a strange way, that enables us, through discipline or ritual, to make contact with those folks, because they're not separated from us by some absolute number of years. Years aren't walls or barriers. Years are fluid. And in these traditional societies in West Africa, for instance, among Native Americans in the United States, it's very true that the ancestors are not behind us, but they are with us. Next to us.
Well, you've mentioned the sea, and the sea is at the very beginning of a passage that I wanted you to read from your book, The Cattle Killing. And this particular passage is the central prophecy. The title of the book is taken from this particular passage of the book.
Yes, it is. A young woman is speaking, and she's speaking inside a dream that is in the mind of the main character, who is an itinerant preacher who lives in the environs of Philadelphia, 1793. But this is a voice speaking to him in a dream. We lived by the sea, but we didn't love the sea, and neither did the sea love us. We did not swim in the hostile salt water. To eat its scaly, slippery creatures was an abomination. We were people of cattle. The cattle were the people the cattle. We drank the milk and blood of our beasts, named them as carefully, hopefully, as we named our children. Cattle, God's gift to us, our past and future, secured by His blessing. Along the edges of the ever-restless sea, in deep black pools of sweet water, where nothing moves but reeds nodding in the wind, time began. These pools, the elders say, are black throats swallowing the rivers that race down from the mountains. There is no bottom to these pools. The clear mountain water flows to the belly of God, who is never sated, nourishing His vastness stretched under the land. Golden beaches and soft green plains, the ripe foothills, the blue mountains scraping the moon, all rest on Him. When He belches, thunder rumbles, lightning is the blink of His eye, His piss, life-giving rain, filling the rivers that empty into the dark mouths of the pools. Though we feared its roar, its ceaseless heaving, the sea also protected us until the day it brought the whites. We welcomed them. We did not understand they had come to murder us and steal our land. When we learned their evil plan, we fought them, but their gods were too strong. The whites banished us from our lands, stole our cattle, brought great woe and misery to the people. A terrible sickness swept the countryside, killing our herds. We, who had been powerful upon the land, were starving beggars. Our chiefs could not lead. Our warriors could not fight. Our women deserted their children. Our young men began to worship alien gods. We looked to the pale people from across the sea to deliver us from the destruction they had wrought. On one of those sad days during the season of death, days of a sorrow so far beyond sorrow, we had no name for it. I was bathing with my sister in a pool at the edge of the land, one of the black pools, deep and calm as palm wine in its gourd of boulders that protects it from the sea. Weakened by hunger, we had stumbled and crawled through the thorn bushes to this place of refuge, hoping the ancient waters might soothe us, save us. The sea's roar allowed strangers to approach. We didn't hear them behind us until one spoke. My sister bolted like a wounded antelope. Splashing out of the water, she ran limping towards our village, screaming for help. I could not stir. Afraid to look at the strangers, I stared down into the deep water, watched it restore itself, close tightly again around my knees, my image locked there, perfect double of a young girl, too affrighted to speak or move. Listen to me, daughter, and do not be afraid, a voice said. We are your father's brothers. You've heard the people say our names. He said the names, and I knew them, and his voice was kind, but still I dared not raise my eyes to look upon his face. Listen with all your ears, child. You must carry my message to our people. Tell them the plague destroying their herds is God's curse upon those who have forsaken His ways. Tell them we must return to the old ways, the sacred path the ancestors walked. But first, the people must kill their cattle. Spread my message to all the clans, daughter. Bid them hear me well. This evil world is dying, a new one on its way. The whites will be driven out. The ancestors will return and dwell again on the earth, bringing with them endless herds of cattle to fill our kraals. But only those who kill all their cattle will be welcomed in this new world. The people must kill their cattle now if they wish to live forever in peace and harmony when the ancestors return. Hear me, child. Instruct the people to kill their cattle. It is the only way to save themselves when this evil world ends.
There is an urgency in the feel of that passage, and it's an urgency we get early on in this book, when the writer said not just that he wants this book to be a warning, he says he wants every word in this book to be a warning. What is the warning that's inherent in this novel?
If I had to boil it down to one phrase or one idea, it would be simply, if you believe the lies of your enemies, you are on the path, the sure path, to self-destruction. If you believe the myths and the lies of your enemies, you're on the way to self-destruction.
The world is filled with false prophecy in the real world and in this novel, as the prophecy of killing the cattle is a false prophecy.
Yes, because when the Xhosa killed their cattle, they simply became second-class citizens in a colonial world, because the cattle, in fact, were at the center of their culture. A Xhosa man had to give cattle to his bride's father to legitimize himself as a warrior and a man. The Xhosa named their cattle, and they never killed them. They simply bled them and used their milk to make some very fortified and strong and health-giving staple food.
Often in this book and in other books that you've written, there are moments that are very painful to read. There's a kind of searing quality to the writing that you do. This is a conference that's dedicated to writing, to the art of writing. Is it as hard, is it as searing for you to commit the words to paper as it is sometimes for the readers to read them?
Well, I think when a book works, if you feel passion in a book, it has to be a combination of what the writer brings to it and you bring to it as reader. So yes, in that sense, you can't get away with half measures. Can't get away with pretense in serious writing, in writing that works.
Do you have to push yourself?
Oh, I don't have to push myself. I have no choice. I don't think writers, the best writers don't have choices about what their material is, what the content is. I think the content knocks on your door and says, here I am, brother, you better deal with me or not write, not even try.
Who taught you how to tell stories?
Well, that goes way back. Great storytellers in my family, aunts and uncles and great-grandparents. And I had that advantage that some people my age and older have had, and that's living in a household of 2 or 3 generations. For a time we lived in my grandfather's house, and that was just great. Great for me because a lot of women around, and I was the oldest son, and I got spoiled, very spoiled. I'll never have life as good as that again. But the stories were very much a part of growing up, oral history. And then when I got a little older and my father took me to the barber shop, I began to hear more of the men's stories. And then as kids, we tried to entertain one another with outrageous lies and singing as we hung around on the corners.
And as a writer, what are the points that you remember as significant in the process of finding your own stories and your own voice?
Well, the first thing, I guess, was learning to be humble and learning to be a listener, because there was this world of story around me, and as a kid sometimes I paid attention and sometimes I didn't, but then I learned to begin to listen, and that was very, very, very exciting when I began to be able to put things together and be able to pick up the messages that were behind the surfaces of the stories, because I learned if I listened closely, the stories got more exciting. They opened up the unknown and the mysterious. So that was one thing, attuning my ear to the power and the many levels of the oral traditions in the African American community. And then much later, after having what was a very, very fine education, University of Pennsylvania, an Ivy League school, and Oxford, finding out that that education had not told me very much about myself as an African American, as an inheritor of an African American tradition. And so I began a second education of reading about Africa, the Caribbean, and African American history. And that was the door to a different kind of writing for myself.
I want to revisit some of the landmarks that you've mentioned. One of them being when you went to Europe as a Rhodes Scholar, and what that signified to you when you were going there, and what it actually meant being there and coming back.
Well, when I went there, I had already made a decision that that writing was something I wanted to do. I was serious about writing, and I made the decision on that basis. And I had in my mind that if you wanted to be a writer, then you had to be like Hemingway and Fitzgerald, and you had to go and Henry Miller, etc. All males, all adventurers, all travelers. I had to go where the action was, and the action was in Europe. So I had to live down and out in Paris and Rome and bring back these gritty stories. Very romantic, very diluted, very one-sided vision of what writing might be. And it was in England that I began to refocus. And I think it was because I missed my world. I missed the music, I missed the dance, I missed the faces. And I realized that I had to find a way to get back to that stuff.
It was a kind of exile, in a way.
It was an exile, but exile's good in a sense, because if I wanted those things, if I wanted the world in which I grew up, I had to both preserve it in my own mind and then provide access to it through imagination, because I couldn't have it. I couldn't turn on the radio, I couldn't walk down the street, hear the voices, so I had to create them in my mind. So it was a very active exile.
All of the writers that you mentioned, not only men, they were all white.
Yes.
You were at the University of Pennsylvania, where you had studied. You were teaching. Another moment that I was very interested in when I read about it was when a young group of students, African American students, came to you and asked you to teach a course, to put a course together in African American literature. And what that meant to you and the kinds of questions you began raising to yourself.
Well, it was a confusing moment. And when I was first asked, my response was a pat academic response. I had been well trained, well conditioned. And my response was, well, I don't know that field. I'm not an expert in that field. And so I think it would be important to get that kind of class in the curriculum, but I can't do it. I can't do it. And thank you for asking me. And not exactly showing them the door, but shaking their hands and saying it's a good idea and I hope you find someone. And then as soon as they were outside the door, it hit me. They weren't asking me to be an expert. They weren't asking me to bring some sort of credentials into this. There were no other black faculty members in this whole university, in the School of Liberal Arts. I was the only one. And they were coming to me for so many different kinds of reasons. And I was so involved in myself and in certain kinds of role playing that I didn't give the immediate spontaneous response and say, hey, let's do this thing. It needs to be done. Let's do it together. And I felt very ashamed after that moment. And it was then that I decided that I would both teach myself the material they wanted. And yes, darn it, I was going to do that class. And I subsequently got in touch with the students, and some were members of that first class I taught in Afro-American Lit at Penn. And even another step, I helped originate a program in African-American Studies at Penn, which involved recruiting students, faculty, and teaching classes.
One of the reasons that episode interested me so much was that, I suppose you could make an assumption that you modeled your writing after African American writers, that you had been steeped in Baldwin or Wright. That was not the case. And the second education that you talked about a few minutes ago was where you really began digging into that body of work.
Yes, in the sense of a literate tradition. As I said, I had that tradition inside of me. I just had to learn how to find it, how to use it. It was there because I had the voices. But even now, I think I have the advantage of all that good education in the sense that I did my homework. I'm a fan of Faulkner, of Joyce, of Virginia Woolf. And those writers still continue to excite me, and I read widely in literatures from all over the world as often and as much as I can. Writers have to read, I think.
You see these worlds as you blend them together, you mix them together, they inform each other. I read a criticism of your work, was curious about how you had responded to it, because it was Jack Kroll from Newsweek who wrote about one of your books. He said, "The brilliance of the language weakens this book." The brilliance of the language, and his exact words were, bleaches out the meaning of the story he's trying to tell. And there is sometimes this great conflict. Can these two worlds exist together? Is there a metaphor that links them, or are they forever, as they were in the eyes of this critic, somehow separate?
Well, I find it unfortunate that often critics bring an apartheid mentality into their criticism. Their racial politics bleed and bleach their writing. I'm not speaking particularly of Mr. Kroll. I don't remember that specific article, but the one kind of criticism that really bugs me is the kind that is in fact thinly disguised racial politics. And the point being that they don't like mine, and I should be doing something else which would more or less agree with theirs. And I try to dismiss that kind of approach in the critics, but it's also very bothersome because it's a tradition in the criticism of African American art in general. Because I don't think that I work necessarily in separate worlds. When I'm listening, even when I was listening to my grandfather or my Aunt May tell a story 45 years ago, they were also Americans. They were Americans who were influenced by what they heard on the radio, the popular music. My grandfather was a paper hanger, and he worked with Italian men all day long, and I'm sure he heard them singing Italian songs, and there were plenty of Italians in Homewood who didn't speak English very much. They spoke all Italian at home, and he was around these guys. And so they shared their heritage, they shared their stories, they laughed together. So in my grandfather's story, I'm sure there was a little, hey, campagna. So, you know, that's been part of it always. In fact, America doesn't exist as a sort of zebra with these distinct black stripes, white stripes, etc., etc. It's all out there. It's all part of all of us. It's our apartheid mentality, which suggests that we always have to separate things, divide things.
Why is there such a reluctance to recognize the informing that happens all the time, as you just described?
Why is there reluctance? Because some people have profited from the divide and conquer mentality. Some people have a very large stake in it. And that stake has never, people don't like that stake to be challenged. And I think it's self-interest. I don't know of any group of people in the world who have, through history or through cunning or warfare or whatever, gained a distinct advantage over another people and then voluntarily, on principle, given it up. Now you might say South Africa is an example, but Nelson Mandela would tell you that the reason he came out of prison was not through the largesse of Mr. de Klerk. That was a necessary factor, but it was the movement in the street. It was the young people in the streets who were not going to let him stay in prison any longer. They're going to tear that country apart. And that's why he came out. So it's that people have a stake in keeping others under their boot.
It reminds me of something your daughter, Jamila, wrote when she was, I think, a junior in high school. Following the Los Angeles riot, she said, I am lost in the dark, unseen until the fires are lighted.
She's a very smart young woman, very sensitive young woman.
We have just a couple of minutes left. When somebody asked me about why I was interested in interviewing you, one of the many reasons was a kind of breathtaking vulnerability that I find in your work, a willingness to talk about things that have happened in your life that are very terrible. The loss of a brother, the loss of a son. And it doubly surprising when I read, you said when you were learning storytelling, that one of the things you learned was that to tell everything was to get you in trouble.
Absolutely.
And yet, you do tell everything. And, well, it's, you don't tell everything. You tell a lot. A lot more than a lot of people would.
But who else in the culture is so adept and spends as much time as to represent a self for the public to consume as an artist? I think writing is always as much about concealing as it is about revealing. I may tell you about losing my best friend because I don't want to tell you about losing something else. And all you know, if I write that effectively, is, well, this man was hurt by losing his best friend. But you don't know about the other business. And also, you won't bug me about the other business because I have you over here dealing with this stuff. So people forget that. And they make the confusion that because a certain kind of persona appears in the writing, that is the whole bit. And I'm complimented by that. I feel complimented that I made a real person for the reader. But I play deep third base. Don't give a lot. I give away what I choose to give away. On the other hand, when you write well, your subject matter, as I said, chooses you.
I was just going to bring that back again, saying sometimes you just don't have any choice about what you keep your own and what you share.
It's not sleight of hand always.
John Edgar Wideman, we're out of time, and I hope you come back again. And I want to thank you so much. Your new book, The Cattle Killing. Thank you again.
My pleasure.
To see more UWTV classics, visit uwtv.org/classics.